I've had this mishmash of ideas sitting in my draft since February, but recent events have moved me to finish this thing out and get my thoughts written down, at least in some form or fashion. The recent phenomena of mass shooting events, taking off especially after Columbine, is something that my mid-50s parents don't understand. It's something that is foreign to them, especially for my father. He was a soldier for 30 years, an avid hunter and outdoorsman, and can remember having a rifle in his truck at high school to discuss hunting trips and recent purchases with his friends in the 1980s. Clearly, things have changed in ways both in the culture and its acceleration that have them shouting at their televisions and computers in angry confusion. Hearing the loud and viscerally angry yell of "what the fuck" in the midst of reading the news isn't something that shook me. I knew what he saw. It was the most recent headline, with regards to dead children in a shooting at an elementary school. He was astounded. He couldn't get it or understand why someone would do it. Neither do I, but I've lived through enough media cycles and mass shootings in my short life to know exactly what will happen next and what will take place. I have, at least to some significant degree, become dulled to all of it. I accept it as a common part of my day-to-day life living in the United States that, however rare these events are, they just come with living here in the same way politicians don't mind the murder and massacres in Chicago because it's a feature, not a bug, of our current political system. There are hundreds of other people who have talked about this at length, and those people will get ignored, in part, because it goes opposite to solving the problem that has any actual intent on being fixed. One may ask why, and it's because we have a ruling elite who sees the problem as yet another nail in their procedural toolbox that can be hammered away with legislation, court rulings, activists, new boards, and surveillance, and Lord knows how many government bureaus and nonprofit organizations that can be used to tackle the issue. Something that even the fat and laughable senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, had managed to get right, that technocratic solutions won't solve the problem, or at least they won't solve it outright. But I will note that the senator fails to mark that many of our technocratic problems that have come out of this government and its elite class have caused the very issues that we're in. But I'll let his words speak for themselves.
But to be clear, one is one too many. We know that many of these who seek to commit the most heinous crimes, they're isolated from human contact. They're living a virtual life in the absence of community and faith and love. None of that excuses their heinous acts. None of that reduces the evil of their deeds. But these are questions we have to answer if we want to rescue our country. I ask these cultural questions because mere technocratic solutions, the acts of legislators or of government regulators, will not alone solve what ails us. And those who proclaim that it will are not telling you the truth. They are demagoguing for political gain. Now, some may be naive enough to confuse their virtue signaling with real solutions. But most are engaged in the most cynical kind of politics.
It's not a nail waiting for a hammer to strike down this particular problem, as the hammer only contributes to the problem because it doesn't address the hydra. The hydra, with its many heads thrown into the machine, its guts and bones causing disruptions, always growing new ones to replace the ones eviscerated, causing even more societal disruptions within our social machine and order. I'm not the world's most well-read man. There are dozens of other people who swim in these circles that are. But from Columbine to what we're reeling from right now, we're once again noticing the same things over and over again. That cops aren't acting the way they're supposed to, which is to take down the perpetrator and stop the violence, or with evidence to suggest that there was communication with retired federal officials, lending more credence to the idea that many of these shooters have been groomed by our government. When the tweeter and podcaster, who is also a sitting U.S. senator, was asked why is this uniquely an American problem, it's one that should be easy to answer with. America is a fundamentally sick country. Its ills have been normalized and exploited by those that take advantage of the many breaks and jagged edges of our social machine in order to find positions for themselves in the midst of incentives generated by bodies of dead children and gang violence. Although I suppose a more honest answer towards the events about America's gun problem could go back to more forbidden questions posed by Carlyle or the Moynihan Report, but perhaps we can address that issue in a future video. But there is the causal problem that I feel needs to be addressed here. If the functionality of a society as a machine has failed to such a point wherein this is a problem of our cultural ills that are seeing its consequences move in an upward trend, not just in mass shootings, but in suicides and other criminal acts, then the machine is fundamentally broken. Many of our ills have been described as aberrations, and that we shouldn't be so reductive when it comes to trying to find specific points in history, often centuries ago, that led to some narrative or narrative of history and line of logic that explains just how we got to here. I am usually hesitant to engage in root cause debate, as many a tradcath on Twitter, or so they claim to be, likes to blame everything on Luther or a neo-pagan blaming everything on Christianity. I find it to be incredibly reductive in nature. However, nothing has a singular cause or answer as to how we got to here, which is why I find the hydra explanation so more apt. More heads and the creation of even more shoving themselves into the gears and moving parts of a functioning society has certainly led to its decline. You'll see gaskets blow and other things creep to a halt, whether that be the explosion of single-parent households to the government no longer representing your interests in the midst of replacing their constituent demographics. Laying the groundwork prior to the 20th century has its through lines in other areas, a common reactionary talking point going back to the Enlightenment or the French Revolution. There is mechanical causality, something which, while linear, doesn't necessarily mean it's one singular root cause, just as the logic of one item, being expressed for the singular purpose and nothing more, can be used in less than a decade to get to where we are now. To continue with this Hydra example, one change into the machine affects several other parts, and now we've got married people with an invented right to privacy to use contraception within their own domicile in 1965. Well, now what? Well, we get an answer in the early 1970s with Roe v. Wade less than a decade later. Even prior to the 20th century, you could see this in proto-feminist movements addressing other questions, whether it be suffrage, race with the anti-woman speech, and temperance. Again, how a singular issue to disrupt the social machine can spill over into every other part of that machine. Leftism is a nice way to tackle these various clogs, blown gaskets, grinding gears, and so on, and it is to simply treat them in the order of importance for the totality of their liberation ideology, a humanist prosperity gospel which becomes the inverse of any true ontological substance, often best seen and interpreted as the intersectional framework. It is a self-correcting framework, attending to the needs of its various niche identity and minority groups to best associate which can take advantage of the system that it parasitizes itself off of while it wrangles for complete mental and societal control, like a fungus creating a zombie out of an ant, or some kind of zombie prion we would see in apocalyptic fiction. It's an effective memeplex, a mind virus, if you will. It creates its own hierarchies within regards to its own oppression Olympics, balancing and juggling rather effectively the needs of its feminist, environmental, gender, and racial movements. You'd be apt to point out that it doesn't grok, logically speaking. After all, what is a woman's right to choose, read baby murder, is about women. But what is a woman in 2022? You can find an answer to that question, or no answer really at all, from Matt Walsh. But, as Nick Land pointed out in The Dark Enlightenment, the left thrives off dialectics. Any time there is contradiction, there is an avenue for power to be created. I can also expect someone, as I say this all out loud now, to tell me to move past the 2015-2016 era talking points about the left. No one talks about intersectionality anymore. Get better material. Read a book, dumbass. My question is that we know these things still operate, The critical theory is still there, and these people publish literally everything that they're doing. It's a great ideological moving tool to get towards bigger things, getting more or less all of the facets of these various niche left-wing positions united towards some globalist revenge, wherein man-made eschatologies of all sorts are found through owning nothing and being happy, while companies work in tandem globally at these conferences, or with the status-seeking millennial women nearing 40 and childless looking for some form of meaning by pushing more HR and more ESG. Do you see what I mean? More heads of this hydra coming further and further, diving into the already clogged-up machine. All of this has been a part of the great hellscape that we live in, and has been going on for quite some time. It took center stage in the 20th century. We should repeal the 20th century by all means, but I think we must certainly go back further. Now, you're wondering just what the hell all of this has to do with the topic at hand, the tragedies that we see on our news screens, the immediate rush of politicians, NGOs, and the academic intelligentsia to make exploitative snuff films to push the agenda in the midst of a shooting like we just witnessed. Clearly, we're seeing young, despondent, and dispossessed men seeking something that can easily be manipulated or taken advantage of to groom someone to go down the rabbit hole where these kind of acts of violence are the only way through. So if you ask, are the kids all right? The answer is clearly no. We live in a time in which man has been tamed, to where the logical conclusion of what Lewis wrote is right before our eyes, to quote from his Abolition of Man. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we removed the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful. The abolition of man has led to the atomization of man. The atomization leads to the search for meaning. The atomization includes digital deracination and millions of men looking for anything to belong to. Ideology, violence, gangs, porn, the desire to transition, self-harm, suicide, just to feel like they are something, or just to flat out end the pain. But of course, I can already hear the usual liberal rejoinder. Just ban guns. We know how this ends. Just look at Australia. Well, I really would wonder how well Australia is doing, considering its own internal concentration camps over the issue of a vaccine, not to mention the various issues regarding suicide deaths growing by other means, not just by the use of a firearm. You aren't going to fix this by pen, at least with the powers that be in control. In a time of great decadence and depression, wherein men kill themselves, Americans are living shorter lives, we're spiraling towards war, economic depression, and technocratic global rule, what more can you expect than these sorts of actions being played out by whatever which way they can in order to speed up their own forms of complete takeover? The powers that be do not care that men are despondent, angry, and have the very will sapped from them while they're surrounded by endocrine disruptors and food that is basically poison. So why not listen to a stranger online that tells you to do such evil acts? After all, why not do something that leads to more control over the citizenry, exacerbating the problem? Culture is a very easy thing to destroy when you have the means to tear it apart. Perhaps this is my own exasperation, knowing that the men of the West are looking for meaning, leadership, a Caesar, a Superman, or the second coming. But no man knoweth the hour. We cannot languish waiting for something to happen. My viewpoint is that in this current moment is knowing the dangers and poisons that lie right in front of us and how to best avoid them, and maybe bring some of our fellow men along with us. A cultural vanguard is just as necessary as an intellectual one. To save what made men men, our beliefs, and to carry them on into perpetuity. Enjoying the decline may just be laughing at its absurdism, but if you decide to get your rocks off by playing into the same incentive structure that destroys what you hold dear, is simply not a viable option. You may not have your fun, and there is a time for fun in the right place, but perhaps that day will come when the breathing space has been secured. After all, we're in a time where our elites see themselves as the only true human beings alive on this earth, wanting to make something more akin to Homo Deus, while the rest of us are gluttons, serving and make-work jobs and eating the filth that they sell and control for their post hoc rationalizations of salvation when it really means having power over others. They'll profit off their insects and fake meat while groveling and moaning as they enjoy their private reserves on their own vast farmland. This despondency and despair that leads so many to convenient affairs is a feature, not a bug, of the culture that was weakened in the 19th century, hijacked in the 20th, and is set for a collision course in the 21st. All I can say for now, besides what I have offered here, is to finish your race, fight the good fight, and keep the faith in whatever it is that you're doing. For the time being, feel free to refer to this video anytime that you see a shooting event being propagated by the media in the United States, because unless what is addressed in this piece is left untouched, they will certainly continue well past our own lifetimes.